So here we are back at our Linux machine, and as you can see, we're loaded directly into Metasploit. So I'm just going to clear this so we can start typing at the top. And what I wanted to do was to go through the search command. Search, obviously, remember, allows us to go through and search for an exploit. So what I'm actually going to do is do name, type the word SharePoint, and then do -t exploit. And the reason I want to show you this is to show you the massive list that comes back when you actually use Metasploit to look for a specific thing that contains the word SharePoint as an exploit. As you can see, there is one result that comes back, and that relates to SharePoint 2007. So of course, if you do have SharePoint 2007, then by all means, you can utilize this one, which is about remote code execution. So that should make you think twice before trying to use some of the basic exploits against SharePoint, because there really isn't that many vulnerabilities that are available in the SharePoint framework, and that's a good thing. But that makes it very complicated when you need to understand for yourself and make sure for the business that your SharePoint application and servers are nice and secure. So this is where we think differently. We think, well, there's not any way of us using Metasploit to break into SharePoint, so let's look at the surrounding applications that SharePoint requires. So, as we understand, SharePoint requires Active Directory, or at least some authentication stack. It requires a database infrastructure, which is Microsoft SQL Server. It also would then require any number of services such as Office web app infrastructure, or it might require Exchange for email or an SMTP gateway. There could be a reverse proxy, a firewall. As you start to realize when you think of SharePoint, it's not just SharePoint as the install, it's a whole host of other applications that create the platform. So let's change Windows slightly and go back to a separate console. And for here, what we'll do to help us first is we'll utilize Nmap that we used before. And we'll do a standard scan. And remember, we're still going to utilize the existing sessions that we had before. So I'm on a different subnet and I want to scan 192.168.1.70 to 80. This will give me 10 IP address range to scan and look for targets that we can compromise. Okay, so we have some come back. You'll notice we have 70, 72, 73, 74, 75, and 80. So that's always a good sign when there's that many kind of close together, that it's either going to be workstations or it's going to be server infrastructure, because most server devices and most standard infrastructure, whether it's using DHCP or static addresses, tend to go in a logical sequence. So we have some machines that we can utilize. So let's pick one of them. Let's pick the 192.168.1.70. So I'm going to clear this, and I'm going to do another Nmap scan, and this time I'm going to just target that single IP address. And there we have it. Our results have returned. If we scroll up to the top of the results, you can see that we targeted 1.70. It's come back with the list of ports, tells me it has DNS. It has a whole host of RPC ports that are available. If we scroll down, it will tell us that it's Windows 2012. It'll tell us the name of the machine, which is called Loki. Tells me the version of Windows, so it's 2012 R2 data center. It tells me the fully qualified domain name. And if we keep going down, it gives me the trace route. It gives me all kinds of information about this machine. Now, if we scroll back up for a second, based on the number of ports that would be open and the types of ports, I can probably guess that this may be some kind of domain controller. So now we have an IP address. Now we need to see what we can do with it. So remember, we scanned the network, only 10 IP addresses, of course. We targeted one machine and found the information back from an Nmap scan. So let's just clear the results. And I'm going to go ahead and do MSF console. I'm going to do -L because I want to read some files in later and I want to use it in a different format. So I'm going to choose MSF console -L, and this should then load Metasploit. Okay, Metasploit is now loaded, so we'll click clear. So we're going to use our standard exploit that we've used previously, Windows SMB PSExec. We're then going to go through and set our values. So our host was the IP address that we just did the fingerprint for. I'm then going to set my payload. I want that to be a Windows. This time we'll use a shell and we'll do reverse TCP. So this is going to return me a command prompt to my Linux machine. I'm going to set the L host. This is the returning machine. And then we'll set the L port to be an obscure port. It could be anything, but obviously we need to make sure nothing else is listening. I know that 4444 isn't being used by anything. And I'm then going to go ahead and set my SMB domain. Now we know that the domain is Kinesis Labs. And of course, in the previous modules, we use an account called Loki with a super secure password of passoutword1. So we have our remote host 192.168.1.70. We have our returning listener, which is on this machine on port 4444. We specify the domain. We have a user account. Now let's go ahead and exploit. So I'm going to exploit. It's going to run against the machine. It's going to upload the executable, run the executable, remove it, and then return me a command prompt. So now that I have a command prompt, I should be able to run some basic commands. So the first command I'm going to do is just net user, and what we'll do is we'll try and create a _hacker account with the same password, passoutword1, and I'll do add. Okay, so that means that my Loki account has some level of access to the machine that I'm on, which is great. Now this doesn't always happen, but normally you can use service accounts. We could have brute forced the password, or you could have been given an account, or it could be your account that you're using to see if you have the ability to add something. So I've now added a -hacker account or _hacker account to this machine. What I'm able to then do is we'll do net local group. And what I'm going to try and do is add my user to the administrators group on that machine. So I've now successfully created a local account _hacker and added it to the local administrators group. Now that's great. I now have a session connected to a Windows machine as a local hacker, and I have a command prompt. Now that doesn't particularly help me too much. I've managed to create an account, but I don't have access to do other things in the domain, because really what I would like to do is make that account a member of the domain, make it a domain administrator account. That's really what we're talking about. We're talking about elevating the account. So I'm going to exit out of the command prompt. This will close the session down, and it should return me to my Metasploit window, and I will press clear. I will type clear. So we're back here. I'm now going to change the payload that I've used, and I'm going to this time bring back a interpreter session, and this time we'll use reverse HTTPS, which will bring us back a connection. If I now do show options, you'll see that everything is still specified. I haven't changed anything else. My remote host is still the same, and my listener is still the same here. So let me just clear the screen and come up to the top, and then just click exploit. We're now going to go ahead and connect to that machine again. It's going to upload as before, and now it's returned a interpreter session. So it's exactly the same process as we had before, but this time the reverse handler is coming over HTTPS. So it looks like it's browser traffic, which is even better. So when someone's checking the network, it just looks like HTTPS something. So now that I'm connected, I can then do what we did before and load incognito. And this will load me the extension that allows me to check for tokens. I'm going to type list tokens -u. This will then list me the tokens that are running. And as you can see, on the machine that I'm connected to, I have the administrator. I also have what looks like the SharePoint Farm service account. So I can now choose to kind of impersonate one of these accounts. So I'm going to choose impersonate token. And because the administrator account is there, I'm probably going to have more success with this one. So I'm going to say impersonate the Cohesys Labs administrator. So this is going to now try to elevate my account access to that administrator. It now says successfully impersonated the user Cohesys Labs administrator. So now that my session is currently running under this account, I now need to re-execute my command line shell because I want to have something in the context of that user. So kind of like when you go to a Windows machine and say run as, and then specify a different account. So to do that, I'm going to type the word execute -F to tells me that I want to run a command prompt, and then a couple of other parameters that we'll come back to, which tell it to load the window in the context of me and specify what I want to run. So I'm going to enter that command, and now my command prompt has been returned. So remember what just happened. We connected to the machine. We created a local account because we exploited the Windows machine. We then came back and changed the payload so it runs over HTTPS and this time returns a interpreter session. We then chose to load incognito to find the existing tokens that are on the machine. Then we impersonated the administrator and then told Meterpreter to go and get me the command shell or the command line prompt under the guise of that account. So my Windows command prompt is now running under as the administrator. And I can type who am I? And this will come back and say you are Cohesys Labs /administrator. So now what I should be able to do is type net group domain admins, take my hacker account, add /domain. So now, under the guise of me being an elevated user within a Meterpreter session and being able to make myself an administrator, I can now take that existing account, the _hacker account I created earlier, and now add it to the domain admins group of the domain. So what does that look like on the Active Directory server? So here I am on the Active Directory server. I can click on users and there you'll see my _hacker account exists. And if I open this, notice there's no values because we didn't pass any values. So it's just an empty account. But if I choose member of, you'll now see it's a domain user. It was a member of the local administrators group and now it got elevated to a domain admins account. So let's go back to my Linux machine. So now we're back at this machine. We now need to look at some way of maintaining access or capturing other information because it probably won't be long until someone notices that there's an _hacker account being added to the domain. If not, it's already been flagged up. So what we're going to do is quickly exit from the session. We're now back at the Meterpreter window. And what I'm then going to do is I'm going to exit out of the Meterpreter session. This will take us back to our PS exec where I'll click clear. And then what I'm going to do is go back and reset the payload that we were using this time. And I'm going to go back to Windows and I'm going to go back to a Meterpreter session. And this time I want to go back to a reverse TCP session. And you might wonder why I'm flicking between them. One, it's good practice, but it's also good practice to change the traffic that's going backwards and forwards. And I'm just going to reset and make sure that my L host is set to my IP address because I want this to work. And then we'll just exploit. So this will go ahead and connect to that machine again and bring me back the Meterpreter session. So I just wanted to make sure that nothing was changed, because sometimes when you set the payload, the lhost value can be changed. So that's why we set it again. But we're now back at a Meterpreter session. What I can now do is use something called getSystem. And what getSystem will do is go ahead and try and get me as the system account so I can see who I am as the user. What I'm then able to do is type PS, and we used this last time. I'm able to now see the list of processes that are running on those machines. And really what I'm trying to look for is something like this, the administrator, because I'm no longer running in the guise of that account. Now I could go back and do token steal, or I could do incognito again, but what I wanted to do is do it differently. I want to come in and take one of these accounts and migrate it so it becomes me. So I'm going to take this account, which is explorer.exe, with an ID of 1628. And I'm going to use a command called migrate. And what that will do is it will migrate me, and I will become that. So I'm going to click migrate 1628. So now I'm in the context of that specific user when it completes. So what we've actually done is I've migrated my session into an existing administration session, so I can now run something. Now, of course, what I'm able to do now is I can run something in what's called post. So I can do Windows, and then I'll choose capture, and we'll do a key log recorder. So this is a post capturing key recorder. So this is now sitting here waiting for things to happen. Now what we're going to do is I'm just going to come out of full screen mode, go back to a previous window. I'm just going to clear that screen down. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to browse to my MSF directory. And remember that everything that comes back from the server is going to be listed in the loot directory. And you can see that we have some information that's in there. So let's leave that as it is, and we'll flick back to our Active Directory server. So here I am back at the Active Directory server. Cheese. So here we are back at the Active Directory server. I'm going to cancel that, and I'm going to pretend to be an administrator. So I have a new administrator, or I need to create a new SharePoint account. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on SharePoint and say new user. I'm going to call it SP_@pool2. I'm just going to create a test account. Click next. Give it the super secure password that we had before. Tell it to can't change the password, and password never expires, and click finish. So I've now just created a new application pool. So I'm now going to flick back to my Linux machine. So here we are back at the machine. Let's go back to my Meterpreter session. It's still going. Let's flick back to this one and type ls. Nothing's been updated so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this one to save the last few keystrokes, and then that stopped the keystroke sniffer. If we now flick back to my previous window and choose ls, you'll see that we actually have a file listed, and it's been there the whole time, the one that was listed for today's date. I can now choose nano, and we'll choose that file. And as you can see, in that file, there was a keystroke log, which said I typed SP_, then I typed app0, then I went through and did a control to get rid of something, then I typed pass@word and pass@word. So the keylogger was able to grab something that I was doing. Now this is a quick way of keeping a backdoor, because people will go onto the Active Directory servers quite frequently. They'll move accounts around. Now imagine how much information would be in this file if it was a large corporate Active Directory where the administrators were moving accounts, creating accounts, changing passwords, we would very quickly get access to lots and lots of information.